It was a cold and silent night. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of winter. Deep in the mountains, there was a small cabin, far away from the nearest village. Inside, a lone man sat by the fire, his eyes focused on the crackling flames. His name was Marcus, and he had chosen this life of solitude after years of serving in the military. The peace of the mountains gave him the escape he needed, away from the noise of the world. He never expected anything to disturb his quiet life. But tonight would be different. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, blanketing the ground in a thick white layer. Marcus heard the sound of something moving outside, faint at first, but growing louder. At first, he thought it might be an animal or the wind playing tricks. But something felt off. The noise grew closer. A soft shuffle followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. His instincts, honed from years of military service, told him something wasn't right. He stood up, walking to the door, unsure of what to expect. The door creaked as he opened it just enough to peek outside. The night was dark, and the snow made it difficult to see. The only light came from the dim glow of his cabin, casting long shadows on the ground. He stepped outside carefully, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. His breath came out in visible puffs as he scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. Then, just at the edge of the light, he saw her. A figure lay in the snow, barely visible in the dark. It was a woman, her body covered in dirt and bruises. She was shivering violently, her clothes torn and soaked through from the snow. Marcus's heart raced as he knelt down beside her. Her skin was pale, almost unnatural, and her hair was matted. With blood, she was breathing, but barely. "Hey, are you okay?" Marcus whispered, gently shaking her. The woman's eyes flickered open, barely able to focus. Her voice was weak, almost a whisper. "Please, help me, Without thinking, Marcus scooped her up into his arms. She was light, but her body felt like dead weight, her energy all but gone. He rushed her back inside the cabin, doing his best to shield her from the cold. The moment he crossed the threshold, he slammed the door behind him and laid her gently on the couch. The woman's breathing was shallow, her body shaking from the cold. Marcus grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her, trying to warm her up. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? What was she doing out here, in the middle of nowhere? He had never seen her before, but there was something strange about her. The way she looked, the way she spoke, it was different from any human he had ever met. He took a step back, unsure of what to do. Should he call for help? Should he let her stay? There was something in her eyes, something desperate, that made him want to protect her. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. His instincts told him she wasn't just an ordinary woman. He knelt beside her, trying to get a better look at her injuries. Her clothes were torn in strange patterns, almost like they had been ripped by something other than the cold. Her skin, though pale, had an odd tint to it, not quite like any human he had seen before. She looked like she was from another world. But how could that be? He shook the thought out of his head. Didn't make sense. Who did this to you? Marcus asked softly, his voice filled with concern. He wasn't sure what kind of answer he was expecting, but when she spoke, it was not what he had imagined. Double quotes. They are coming for me, she gasped, her voice weak, but filled with fear. I am not safe. You must hide me, please. Don't let them find me. Marcus's mind raced. Who's coming for you? What do you mean? The woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to speak. My people, she whispered. They want me dead. I've been exiled. They won't stop until I am gone. The words didn't make sense. Exiled. Dead. Marcus couldn't understand. The woman before him didn't look like a criminal or a fugitive. She looked like someone who had been through hell. He didn't know what to believe, but the fear in her eyes told him she was telling the truth. Someone or something was after her, and it wasn't just any regular human trouble. This was something far more dangerous. Marcus's mind raced as he processed her words. "You're not safe here. They're after you, they'll find you," he said, his voice firm. "But I'll do what I can to protect you. You're safe here for now. We'll figure this out." The woman's eyes softened, but she seemed too weak to respond. Her body was shivering uncontrollably, and Marcus knew she needed help. He quickly grabbed some supplies from the kitchen and began preparing a makeshift first aid kit. As he worked, he kept an eye on her, unsure of what the future held. But one thing was clear: his quiet, peaceful life was over. The night had changed. Everything as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. This woman, this stranger from the snow, was more than she seemed. And whatever had exiled her was coming for her, and for him. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the cabin walls as Marcus sat beside the woman. She had fallen into a restless sleep, her face still pale and bruised, but her breathing was steadier now. Marcus had done what he could heed, treated her wounds, wrapped her in blankets, and fed her what little food he had left. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her presence in his cabin, the strange fear in her eyes, and her cryptic words left him with more questions than answers. As the hours passed, the storm outside grew fiercer. The wind howled through the trees, and snow pounded against the windows. It was as if the world itself was closing in on them, making the small cabin feel even smaller, more isolated. Marcus stared into the flames, his mind racing. He couldn't understand why she was here, or why she seemed so frightened. Who could possibly want her dead? And why was she exiled from her people? His thoughts were interrupted when the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she winced at the light from the fire. Marcus was there immediately, helping her sit up. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice low. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant, as if she were lost in another world. I'm fine. It's just ... hard to remember everything." Marcus waited in silence, sensing there was more she wanted to say. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where to begin," she said, her eyes clouded with pain. "But I owe you the truth. You deserve to know what's happened to me." Marcus leaned forward, his attention fixed on her. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," he said. "But if you do, I'll listen." The woman's gaze flickered toward the window, as if she were afraid of being watched. Then, with a deep breath, she began. "My name is Ara," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not from this planet, or this galaxy, for that matter. I come from a distant world, one that was once full of life and prosperity. But everything changed when my people became corrupted. They lost their way, driven by power and greed. The rulers of my world, the elders, began to make terrible decisions. They took more from the people than they gave, and they used their power to control us all." Marcus listened intently, unsure of how to react. This was nothing like anything he had ever heard before. His eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of her story. "We were once a peaceful people," Ara continued, her voice soft but filled with sadness. "But the elders began using forbidden technology to extend their lives to control the minds of others. They became ... different. Cold. They stopped caring about the rest of us. The worst part is, it began to fear those who still had a voice. Those who resisted. Arcus frowned, not fully understanding. You were part of the resistance. Era nodded, her eyes dark with memories. Yes, I was one of the few who fought back. I believed in the old ways that respected life, balance, and freedom. But the elders couldn't have that. They labeled me a traitor, a threat to their power. So they exiled me. They sent me away to die on some distant, forgotten world. Era's voice cracked as she spoke, her hands trembling. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave my family, my home. But they made me. They told me I was a danger, that if I stayed, I would destroy everything. Marcus sat back, his mind struggling to comprehend the gravity of her words. This wasn't just some personal feud. This was an entire people, a society that had fallen to darkness, and Era was one of the few left who still held on to the ideals of freedom and peace. He could feel the weight of her words, the years of suffering she had endured. They were wrong, Marcus said softly, breaking the silence. You're not a threat. Era looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. Maybe, but to them, I am, and that's why they're hunting me. They've sent their best soldiers to find me, to bring me back, or to kill me. They won't stop until I'm gone. Marcus's heart sank. He had no idea who these elders were or how they operated, but he could see the fear in Era's eyes. These weren't just random enemies. They were ruthless, powerful beings who would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone who threatened their control. But why come here? Marcus asked. Why to this remote cabin? Why not anywhere else? Era hesitated before answering. I didn't have a choice. The storm, ... It was the only thing that kept me hidden. I couldn't risk being tracked. Been running for days with no safe place to go. But when I saw this cabin, I knew I had to try. Marcus leaned forward again. But why me? Why trust me? Era's gaze softened. You're different. You don't seem like the kind of person who would turn me away. You're kind. You helped me when I had nothing. Marcus didn't know what to say. Her words were simple, yet they held so much weight. She trusted him, despite everything, and now he had to make a choice. Could he really protect her? Could he really stand against the forces that were after her? As the fire crackled in the background, the silence between them deepened. Marcus knew that his life would never be the same. He had taken in a stranger, someone from a faraway world, and now he was tied to her fate. But what he didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would change everything. The wind outside howled louder, making the small cabin feel even more isolated than it already was. Marcus stood near the window, staring into the snowy night, his mind racing. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the promise he had made to protect her, keep her safe from the mysterious forces hunting her. But as the night stretched on, he knew that promise was easier said than done. He was no soldier anymore. He was just a man trying to live a quiet life. How could he face whatever was coming for her? Era, still weak from the ordeal, rested on the couch. Her eyes closed, but Marcus could see the tension in her face. She wasn't sleeping well. She kept tossing and turning, her dreams haunted by something she refused to speak about. She'd told him bits and pieces of her story, but it was clear that she was holding back, still unsure of how much she could trust him. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively going to the small rifle he kept. near the fireplace. His heart raced as the reality of the situation hit him. This was it. The moment he feared had arrived. They were here. Whoever they were here. The knock came again. This time louder, more insistent. Marcus's thoughts raced. Should he open the door? Should he hide Era? Or should he prepare to fight? He glanced at her, but she was still on the couch, her eyes wide with fear. She knew what was coming. Era whispered urgently, "Don't open it. Don't let them see you." Marcus didn't answer. His mind was spinning, but he had no choice. The door was just a few feet away, and whoever was on the other side would know they weren't alone if he didn't act fast. He glanced out the window again, but all he could see was the swirling snow. There was no sign of anyone. The knock came. A third time, this time followed by a voice. "We know you're in there." The voice called out, low and controlled, but laced with authority. "Open up. We have business with the alien." Marcus's stomach twisted. They were here for Era. He had no idea who they were, but their tone told him they weren't the type to negotiate. The weight of the situation sank in even deeper. His promise to protect her had just been put to the test. Era moved from the couch, her body shaking with fear. "Marcus, you have to hide me. They'll kill you if they find me." He didn't need any more convincing. He quickly shoved a few chairs in front of the door to block the view. He then motioned for Era to follow him to the back of the cabin. She moved cautiously, her feet dragging, but Marcus could tell she wasn't weak anymore. She was just scared. Era spoke in a low voice, "They won't stop until they have me." "You don't know who they are, Marcus. These people, they're not human." Marcus shot her a quick glance. "Then what are they?" Era hesitated, her eyes dark with the weight of the secret. "They're the Elder Soldiers. I've told you about them. They're not just soldiers, they're hunters, trained to track and eliminate anyone who stands in the way of their power. They've been coming after me ever since I escaped." Marcus's pulse quickened. He thought of the knock on the door, the voice that demanded to be let in. These people weren't just any threat. They were dangerous. "Stay here," he whispered to Era. "I'll figure something out." He moved silently through the cabin, grabbing the rifle and checking the ammo. His hands were steady, but his heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't been in a real fight in years. His military days felt like a lifetime ago, but now there was no turning back. Era was depending on him. He took a deep breath and positioned himself behind the front door. He didn't have a plan. Not really. But he knew that if he didn't act fast, he and Era wouldn't stand a chance. The door suddenly creaked open, just enough for a figure to step into the dimly lit cabin. Marcus's eyes locked onto the intruder, a tall man dressed in dark, military-like gear. His face was cold, almost robotic, and his eyes scanned the room with calculated precision. Behind him stood two more figures, all armed with weapons that glinted in the low light. "We know she's here," the leader said, his voice chilling. "Step aside. We'll handle this." Marcus stood his ground, raising the rifle, his hands tight around the weapon. "You're not getting her. You'll have to go through me first." The leader didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake. Human, we have orders. This is not your fight." "I don't care," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "She's under my protection, and I won't let you take her." The tension in the room was thick, like the calm before a storm. Era's soft breath could be heard from the back of the cabin, and Marcus felt her presence even if she wasn't. In his sight, he couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after everything they had already been through. The leader gave a short, humorless laugh. "Very well," he said, drawing his weapon. "If it's a fight you want, it's a fight you'll get." Suddenly, the sound of gunfire shattered the air, and Marcus dove to the side, barely avoiding the first blast. He returned fire, his hands shaking as he aimed at the soldiers. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The gunfire echoed through the cabin, shaking the walls. Marcus's heart was racing as he scrambled to his feet, barely avoiding another blast from the soldiers outside. His mind was clouded with panic, but his instincts were sharp. He had no time to think. The men who had come for Era weren't just any soldiers. They were trained professionals, and they were deadly. His rifle felt too small in his hands against the danger they posed. Era's voice came from the back of the cabin, trembling but clear. "Marcus, they're too strong. You can't fight them alone." She was right. He could feel it. The odds were stacked against him. He wasn't a soldier anymore, just a man trying to protect someone he barely knew. He had no idea how long he could keep this up. Suddenly, there was a new sound, a sharp crack from the window at the far side of the cabin. Marcus turned his head just in time to see a figure slide through the opening, moving with incredible speed and grace. The figure was dressed in dark, tight-fitting armor, and their face was hidden behind a mask. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Had the soldiers sent reinforcements? But then, the figure spoke, and the voice was unmistakable, smooth, calm, but with a tone that suggested this was someone who had been through many battles. "Get down." The figure shouted, and before Marcus could react, a series of quick, calculated movements disarmed the soldiers, sending them sprawling to the floor. It happened so fast that Marcus barely had time to register it. The figure was on top of the soldiers, moving like lightning, and in just moments, they were all disarmed and knocked unconscious. Marcus's eyes widened as the figure stood up, their movements precise and confident. The woman turned to him, her eyes now visible through the helmet she wore. "I see you've made some interesting choices." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Who are you?" The woman removed her helmet, revealing short, dark hair and a face that looked far too young for someone with such skill. "I'm someone who's been watching," she said simply. "I'm not here to hurt you." Marcus still had the rifle in his hands, though now he wasn't sure what to do with it. He lowered it slowly, still on high alert. "You've been watching. You knew about them? About all of this?" The woman nodded. "I've been following their movements for a while now. When I saw you take her in," she motioned toward Era, who was still hiding behind the furniture, "I knew things would get complicated. I had to act. Why didn't you come sooner?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp with frustration. "We could have used help back when the door was being knocked down." The woman's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Hush. I couldn't risk revealing myself until I was sure, and I needed you to make the first move. If you didn't, I wouldn't know." "If I could trust you?" Marcus stared at her for a long moment. "Trust me," he repeated, his voice incredulous. "I don't even know who you are." The woman sighed and crossed her arms. "My name's Delia. I'm from a group of ... rebels. We've been fighting the elder soldiers for years. I'm not one of them," she added quickly, "but I know them. I know their tactics, their methods, and I know how to survive their hunts." Era stepped cautiously into the room, her eyes still wide with fear, but a flicker of hope seemed to be growing inside her. "You single quotes, a rebel?" she asked quietly. Talia gave her a nod. her expression softening slightly. Yes, but not in the way you think. I wasn't exiled by the elders like you. I'm one of the few who managed to escape them before they could turn me into what they are. Era's brow furrowed. What do you mean? What did they do to you? Talia's face darkened, her eyes momentarily distant. They took everything from my family, my home. I was one of their chosen soldiers once. I didn't know what they were doing until it was too late. By the time I realized what they were capable of, I was already too deep in. I had no coic but to run. But it wasn't enough. They still came for me. And now, I'm one of the hunted. Marcus listened in stunned silence, taking in everything Talia said. She wasn't just an Elise, she was someone who had experienced the same kind of pain Era had. The feeling of being hunted, exiled, betrayed. But you're here to help us, right? Arcus asked, his voice filled with the hope that had been missing until now. Thalia nodded again. I am. I've been working alone for a long time, but I've heard rumors. The elders are getting desperate. They know you're still alive, Era. They won't stop until they find you. Era looked down, the weight of those words sinking in. I've already lost so much, I can't keep running. I don't want to run anymore. Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm. Then we stop running together. Talia's eyes met his, a small but knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. That's the spirit, she said. But it won't be easy. We'll need to fight back, and I can teach you both how to do it. Marcus felt a surge of determination. For the first time since Era had arrived, he felt like there might actually be a way out. With Thalia's help, they might just stand a chance against the elders and their army of hunters. The three of them stood together in the cabin, the crackling fire casting shadows on the walls. It wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a fight for freedom. And they were ready to face it head on. The days following Thalia's arrival were a blur of action. With her help, Marcus and Era began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the elder soldiers. Talia had been training them, teaching Marcus how to handle a weapon with precision and how to think like a hunter. Era, though still hesitant, was learning to harness the strange powers that had been awakened within her. She was beginning to realize that her abilities were more than just a survival tool. They were her key to taking back control of her destiny. But with every passing day, the pressure mounted. The elders were still out there, searching for Era, and Marcus knew that no matter how much they trained, they were running out of time. The snowstorms that had once hidden them were beginning to clear, and the days were growing longer. Soon, the elders would have no excuse but to find them. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, Thalia sat near the window, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. Marcus was sitting across the room, sharpening his rifle. Era was resting, her eyes closed in quiet concentration, trying to control the strange power inside her. The atmosphere was tense, as it always was these days, but there was also a feeling of anticipation in the air. They were ready to fight back. I think they're getting closer, Talia said, her voice low and filled with concern. Marcus didn't look up. We've known that for days. The question is, do we wait here for them to find us, or do we take the fight to them? Talia paused, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. We don't have a choice. We need to get Era out of here before it's too late. Era opened her eyes slowly, her expression one of quiet determination. I'm not running anymore. If they want me, they can come. I'll fight for my freedom. Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and worry. Era, we can't take on the whole empire. We need a plan, something that gives us an edge. I know, she replied softly. But we've been running for too long. I can't keep hiding. I've already lost everything. This time, I'm standing my ground. The conversation shifted to strategy, and for the first time, there was a sense of unity among them. They would take the fight to the elders, strike when they least expected it. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was their only option as night fell. The wind began to howl again, and the cabin was filled with the eerie sound of the storm outside. Marcus was about to suggest they rest for the night when there was a knock. At the door, soft, hesitant, but unmistakable. Marcus froze. Talia's eyes narrowed and Era stiffened on the couch. The knock sounded again, this time louder, more insistent. Who could that be? Marcus whispered. Thalia moved quickly, positioning herself near the door, her hand on the handle of her weapon. Stay back, she muttered. It could be a trap. Era stood slowly, her face pale. We can't afford any more surprises. If it's them, we fight. Marcus nodded, but his gut twisted with uncertainty. Whoever was on the other side of that door knew too much. They had come for Era, and they knew where to find her. The door creaked open, revealing a figure in the darkness. At first, Marcus couldn't make out who it was, but then the figure stepped into the light. His heart sank as he saw the face. Man who had been their ally, their guide in this fight. It was Ren, one of the humans who had been helping them gather information on the elders. He had worked alongside Talia in the past, and they had trusted him. But now, there was something wrong in the way he looked at them. Something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Ren's eyes flickered to Era, and then back to Marcus and Talia. I'm sorry, he said, his voice strained, almost apologetic. I didn't have a choice. Before anyone could react, Ren reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, pressing a button on it. The room was instantly filled with a high-pitched sound that made Marcus's head throb. It was a signal that would alert the elders to their location. Ren, what the hell are you doing? Talia shouted, her voice sharp with disbelief. Ren's face twisted with regret. I had to. They promised me safety. They promised me everything, my family, my home. They told me I could start over. You sold us out. Talia's voice was cold, laced with betrayal. For your own life, you've doomed us all. Marcus stepped forward, his hand gripping his rifle tightly. You knew the risks when you joined us. You knew what we were up against. How could you betray us? Ren looked away, shame evident in his eyes. I didn't know what else to do. The elders promised me that they'd spare my family if I helped them find Era. I had no choice. You don't understand. If I hadn't done it, they would have killed everyone I love. The room fell into silence as his words hung in the air. Betrayal? It was the hardest thing to hear, especially from someone they had trusted. But it was clear now that Ren's loyalty had been bought with the threat of his family's life. Era, her eyes full of anger and hurt, took a step forward. You thought your family was more important than us? You thought you could sell me out and walk away? I didn't want this, Ren cried, his voice cracking. I didn't want to betray you, but they gave me no choice. I had to protect them. Talia moved toward the door, her hand still on her weapon. You've made your choice, Ren, and now we have to make ours. Ren took a step back, his hands raised in a sign of surrender. Please, don't make me your enemy. I never wanted this, but it was too late. The damage was done. Trust had been broken, and in this fight, trust was everything. Marcus turned to Thalia, his face grim. We deal with him later. Right now, we need to get ready. The elders will be here soon. The night was still, but an unnatural tension hung in the air. The storm had cleared, and a heavy silence filled the cabin. Marcus sat at the table, his eyes scanning over the plans they had made. Era was across from him, her fingers lightly tapping on the surface, deep in thought. Talia stood by the window, watching for any sign of movement. The betrayal from Ren had shaken them, but they couldn't afford to dwell on it. The elders were coming, and they didn't have much time left. "We need to move now," Thalia said. Breaking the silence, "We've prepared as much as we can. If we wait any longer, they'll have us cornered." Marcus looked at Era, whose expression was both determined and fearful. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice steady, but tinged with concern. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The elder soldiers were not to be underestimated, and they would stop at nothing to capture Era. Era stood up, the firelight casting shadows across her face. "I don't have a choice. I've been running my whole life, Marcus. Now it's time to fight for my future, for everyone's future." Talia nodded in agreement, though her eyes were filled with the grim reality of what they were about to face. "We don't have much of an edge, but we have one thing the elders don't. We have the element of surprise." Marcus stood and grabbed his rifle. The plan was simple. They would lure the soldiers into the trap they had set in the nearby woods, a place where the terrain was treacherous and the snow could slow the enemy down. It wasn't perfect, but it was their only chance. They moved quickly, preparing to leave the cabin that had been their temporary haven. The air outside was cold, the snow crunching underfoot as they moved in silence toward the woods. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the weight of the situation, it was the nagging sense that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but saw nothing but the dark, snow-covered trees. Still, his instincts told him they weren't alone. "Stay sharp," Thalia muttered, as if reading his mind. They could be anywhere. They reached the edge of the woods, where the shadows were long and the silence felt almost suffocating. The trap was set. The narrow path ahead was lined with hidden explosives and barriers that would slow down the soldiers. They just needed to draw them in. Era looked up at the sky, her expression distant. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked softly. Marcus turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "It has to. We can't afford to lose this fight." Talia crouched beside a tree, checking her weapon for the 10th time. "We'll need to be quick. When they show up, we move fast, or this all falls apart." Suddenly, the sound of distant engines reached their ears, growing louder with every passing second. Marcus's heart raced. They were here. The elder soldiers were closing in, their vehicles cutting through the snow with unnatural precision. Marcus's grip tightened around his rifle. "They're coming," Talia said, her voice sharp with focus. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting into battle mode. He could hear the vehicles getting closer, their lights cutting through the darkness like a searchlight. A moment of tension passed, and then the first vehicle appeared, its headlights blinding in the night. "Get ready," Marcus whispered. They all took their positions. Marcus and Thalia moved to opposite sides of the path, hidden behind large trees, while Era stayed in the center, waiting for the signal. The soldiers wouldn't know what hit them. The plan was simple. When the first vehicle reached the trap, Era would unleash her power, knocking the soldiers off balance. Then Marcus and Thalia would move in, disarming them before they had a chance to react. The first vehicle came into view, its headlights sweeping across the snow. The soldiers didn't see them yet. Marcus held his breath, counting down in his mind. "Now," Era whispered. And the world seemed to shift. A burst of energy exploded from her, lighting up the dark woods with a blinding flash. The soldiers in the first vehicle were thrown backward, crashing into the snow as the vehicle skidded to a stop. Marcus and Thalia sprang into action, moving swiftly toward the downed soldiers. They had to keep the momentum going. Gunfire erupted from the second vehicle, the soldiers recovering quickly and taking cover. Marcus dove behind a tree, his rifle already raised. Thalia was beside him, firing back at the soldiers who were trying to regroup. Era stood at the center of the chaos, her eyes glowing with power as she sent shockwaves through the air, knocking the soldiers off their feet and scattering them. But there were more soldiers than they had anticipated. Second vehicle was only the beginning. More were coming from the woods, emerging like shadows from the darkness. This is it, Marcus thought, his pulse racing. No going back now. The battle intensified as more soldiers poured in, their weapons aimed at Era. But Marcus and Thalia were relentless. They moved with precision, using the terrain to their advantage. The elders had underestimated them. They didn't know what they were dealing with. Era's power crackled through the air, sending shockwaves that threw the soldiers into chaos. She was learning to control it, her focus sharper now than ever before, but even with her power, they were outnumbered. The soldiers were relentless, and the night seemed to stretch on forever. Thalia moved forward, taking down a soldier with a swift strike. "Keep fighting," she yelled. "We're not done yet." Marcus kept his eyes on Era, making sure she was safe. But there was no time to think, only time to act. The soldiers were closing in, and the fight had only just begun. The snow continued to fall, a soft blanket covering the battle-scarred ground. The night air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the sound of distant gunfire. But, for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a quiet peace among the chaos. The fight was over. The last of the elder soldiers had been taken down, and their vehicles now lay abandoned in the snow. Their engines silent, Marcus stood at the edge of the battlefield, his body aching, his hands trembling from the adrenaline that had surged through him only moments before. He looked around, his eyes scanning the aftermath of the fight. Thalia was beside him, her face grim but determined, wiping the blood from her hands. Era stood further ahead, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her eyes bright but haunted. The energy she had unleashed was still crackling in the air, but it had left her exhausted. She had fought harder than anyone expected, her powers shaking the earth itself, but it had come at a cost. She was tired, and Marcus could see it in her eyes. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice low but filled with disbelief. They had won, against all odds. The soldiers who had hunted Era, the elders who had thought they could control everything, had been defeated. But even with victory in their hands, there was something that gnawed at him. The fight might be over for now, but the war was far from finished. Era turned to face him, her expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "We did, but ... what now?" she asked, her voice soft, as if she was unsure of where to go next. "For so long, all I've known is running, hiding, fighting to survive. Now that it's over, what am I supposed to do? Where do I go?" Marcus took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. He could feel the weight of her words, the burden of everything she had lost, everything she had been through. "You don't have to keep running anymore," he said, his voice steady. "There's no more fear. You've earned your freedom, and so have I." Thalia stepped forward, her expression serious but filled with a spark of hope. "This isn't just about you, Era. It's about all of us. We've all been through hell, fighting for something we couldn't even name. But now, we have a chance to build something new. A world where we're not controlled by fear, where we get to choose our own future. Era looked at both of them, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. She had fought so hard to get here, but now? She was standing at a crossroads, unsure of the next step. I've lost so much, she whispered. I've lost my home, my family. I don't know if I can rebuild any of it. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm but gentle. You don't have to do it alone. You have us now, and we have each other. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind whispered through the trees, and the soft crunch of snow underfoot was the only sound. It was as if the universe itself was waiting for Era's answer. Era closed her eyes, letting the quiet wash over her. She thought about everything she had been through, the pain, the betrayal, the endless days of running. But now, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She didn't have to do it alone. She didn't have to be the only one fighting. For the first time in years, she had found a place, a new beginning. I want to try, Sure said softly, her voice filled with determination. I want to try to build something better, something real. I don't know how, but I want to. Marcus smiled, a rare, warm smile that made his tired eyes sparkle. We'll figure it out. Together. Talia stepped forward, her gaze filled with understanding. The world may be broken, but we don't have to be. There's still time to rebuild. We just have to find the courage to do it. With the last of the elder soldiers defeated and the reign of fear shattered, the future suddenly felt full of possibility. The three of them, once strangers bound together by chance, now shared a common goal. They would rebuild, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered under the elders' control. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more battles, but for the first time, Era felt like she wasn't alone in her fight. The power she had within her wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of her strength, her resilience. And with Marcus and Thalia by her side, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. We start fresh, Marcus said, his voice full of conviction. No more hiding, no more running. We take back control of our lives. Era nodded, her resolve hardening. The past could never be erased, but it didn't have to define her. They had one today and tomorrow. They would continue to fight for the future they deserved. With a final look at the battlefield, Marcus turned away, his steps sure and steady. The snow continued to fall. But now, it felt like the beginning of something new. Era followed him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And Talia, ever watchful, brought up the rear, a small, hopeful smile tugging at her lips. They were not just survivors anymore. They were warriors, and together, they would forge a new path.